In the early 1970s, John DeLorean had moved from being the head of Pontiac Motor Division to being the head of Chevrolet Division. And one of the things that he was significantly jealous of when he got to Chevrolet was that there was no personal luxury car. Remember that John DeLorean had been really the father of the 1969 Grand Prix. And while the 1969 Grand Prix was not the first Grand Prix, that would be the 1962 model year, it really was the first model year that took the personal luxury coupe style of vehicle to a whole new level with excellent styling and a driver-oriented cockpit inside. That 1969 Grand Prix, which lasted all the way through the 1972 model year, was really a hallmark vehicle for Pontiac. Regardless, when DeLorean got to the Chevrolet Motor Division, he noticed that there was nothing analogous for Chevrolet. There wasn't a personal luxury coupe. And so one of the things that he pushed for was the introduction of the 1970 Monte Carlo. That first generation Monte Carlo would last from 1970 through 1972. And from a designer standpoint, though it was a beautiful car, I actually think it was probably the best looking Monte Carlo of all time, many designers were not necessarily thrilled with that first generation Monte Carlo because it had to share so many components with other Chevrolet intermediates like the Chevelle, including the A-pillars and the windshield and various other components that designers felt hampered their creativity. I have to say, from my eyes, the first generation Monte Carlo, like I said, is the best though. In any case, designers were extremely excited that for the 1973 model year, the intermediate-sized vehicles for General Motors would be all new across the board. And this would mean that Chevrolet designers would get a chance to do an all-new Monte Carlo and perhaps really get what they wanted. And over the course of the design, there were various models that were made. Here's a full-size model. And you notice that this was done before the bumper standards came into play. Unfortunately, 1973, the first year of the second generation Monte Carlo, would coincide with the introduction of the 5-mile-an-hour impact standard in the front. And so designers probably didn't get what they wanted. Here you notice the car's got these very finely bladed fenders up front. And there's actually two different proposals here on either side of the car. Notice on the driver's side that I'll call it a bumper, the valence almost, because this is not going to do much in terms of protection, sweeps up to the point that the headlamp is kind of cut in half by the bumper on the driver's side. And then on the passenger side, the bumper goes underneath the headlamp. The proposals here were all single headlamp proposals that I can note. And that is, I guess, perhaps because General Motors was trying to save some cost on its A-bodies. And they would go back to the dual headlamps later on, but for 1973, the single headlamp was the way to go. I will point out, though, that this particular proposal does not have the so-called chicken wings on the front and the back, those big forms. It has a little bit of it on the front, but you'll see as the proposals evolved that they got more and more sculpture, let's call it, on the body sides. And here's another full-size proposal in the design studio. This one, you notice, has those so-called chicken wings and the sculpture to the front and the rear. This was the age in which General Motors designers, particularly styling chief Bill Mitchell, was enamored with the four-fendered look and was trying to incorporate it on many different cars. And I think designers in the building knew he loved the four-fendered look, kind of this older, romantic style Q, and the 71 Eldorado would have that kind of a look to it. It would have had even more of a four-fendered look if the car hadn't been based off of the full-size B bodies, where the car was already so wide, you just couldn't make it any wider. The A-pillars were locked in, and the windshield, etc., so you didn't have much width left that you could work with before the car would need oversized lights on it because it was already 80 inches wide. So it kind of had a muted four-fender form. Here on the A-body intermediates, you could get some more sculpture and that four-fender look in a more pronounced fashion. You also notice here the opera window is a vertical style opera window versus the final 73 Monte Carlo. And this one is very similar to the 71 Eldorado. The 71 Eldorado, in fact, was originally styled as a hardtop, but the designers, led by the design leadership team, changed the way that the 71 Eldorado looked to have that opera window because they wanted to use that design cue on the Monte Carlo that you see here and give the Monte Carlo kind of the mini Eldorado feel. So there's a lot that's very similar here between the Eldorado and the Monte Carlo. That vertical style opera window, notice the vertical style tail lamps on this particular proposal as well, very Cadillac-y. And then you have the four-fendered theme that the Monte Carlo had versus the Eldorado. So things would get toned down and changed a little bit in between this proposal and the final. But again, it's got a lot of little Eldorado in it, and that was very purposeful. I also love in these photos looking at the sketches and the artwork on the boards, and you can see the full-size airbrush rendering there on the right of the picture. Unfortunately, you can't really quite tell that much about what the car looks like from this angle, but you can see on the left of the photo, looks like a quad headlamp where the headlamps are stacked on top of one another proposal for the front end of a Monte Carlo with a big grille. And doesn't that look like a 69 to 70 Cadillac grille a little bit there? So you've got a lot of Cadillac in the Monte Carlo, and again, that was a purposeful choice that designers were making. And lastly, here's a full-size model of a proposed four-door Monte Carlo. There was no four-door, but this is what one might have looked like with the chicken wings on the front and the back. Some of the other intermediate-sized cars, like the Cutlass and the Regal, as well as the Grand Am, had the four-door proposals, but the Monte Carlo did not. And, well, I think this looks okay. It looks a little bit awkward, the roof profile, particularly with that B-pillar there. This was the time frame in which General Motors thought that they were going to have rollover standards, so they're putting pillars back on many of the cars. And, this one, I think it looks okay. Now let's take a look at this. I believe this is dark red is the name of the color, metallic, 1973 Monte Carlo with, I believe, about 13,000 miles on it. And you'll notice again that the front end is similar but different from the proposal. I think the biggest difference here being the very large bumper. Otherwise, designers tried to keep with the same theme, and you'll notice you have the grille that kind of spills out underneath the midsection of the bumper. I'm sure designers just wanted that to be a big open section. Imagine this with no bumper center bar and that grille really extending from the uppermost portion where it is here downward. I think it would be far more dramatic. Unfortunately, you had to contend with the bumper. And of course, this one has the front-mounted license plate too, which obscures the theme. But the Monte Carlo, wasn't necessarily my favorite look. It has a bit of a cues of a Jaguar too, with those headlights and the surfacing over top of the headlights. But you also have some Cadillac too in the front end with that prow on the hood and the raised up section. Again, very similar to the Eldorado, although the Monte Carlo didn't have the bevel theme that the 71 Eldorado, when it would come out, would have. But we already pointed out a number of elements that were similar between the Monte Carlo and the Eldorado. You did have the egg crate grille, similar to Cadillac, in the egg crate texture, because, as those who watch this channel know, egg crate connotes luxury for whatever reason. And as we rotate around to the side, you can see those chicken wings from the proposal are here on the final vehicle. Now, unfortunately, this car has the door edge guard and the body side molding. Ugh, please take those away. It would look much better without it, but certainly have that four-fendered chicken wing look. I talked about the opera window, how it got this, let's say, slight inclination to it as opposed to being perfectly vertical in the proposal. But the rest of the car, it's pretty true to that proposal, aside from the things that I previously mentioned. Now, one of the things about this Monte Carlo that you're going to see as we rotate around to the pure side view, it looks like it needs a little bit more wheelbase. And you can see it here in this angle. I mean, cars of this era had front and rear overhangs, but sometimes the rear overhangs, looked fine. I think because of the chicken wing and the opera window and the slant of the C-pillar, the wheelbase here just looks a little bit off. And here you can see what I mean a little bit better. I think there's just something a little bit off here. The distance from the front of the front bumper to the center line of the front wheel just seems to be excessive. And I think, part of the problem here is frankly that bumper. If that bumper were gone, probably would look about right. And I think this car, as you saw, was designed without that bumper standard in mind. And then it just kind of had to be tacked on at the last minute and to its detriment. You also notice the car has this kind of half vinyl roof. This was a compromise. Designers almost universally abhorred vinyl tops And so the buying customers liked them, and the manufacturers liked them because they didn't have to finish off that seam between the roof and the quarter panel. So here was a compromise between designers and I think the manufacturing engineers to say, okay, well, we'll give you the labor savings associated with not having to finish that joint, and we'll give you, the marketing folks, a vinyl top that you can sell and charge extra for, but we're not going to give you the full look. And we'll save some money too, because the vinyl top is only this kind of half toupee that looks like it slid back and gives the car a little bit of a bald pate up front. So it's a receding hairline Monte Carlo, which was typical of, again, many of the cars of this era. You didn't often see the full vinyl tops. You would see this kind of a style on many of the vehicles at this point. Now, out back, you still have a vertical tail lamp theme, but it's not quite the same as the model, and I suspect this is because, again, you didn't have a 5-mile-an-hour impact standard in the rear in 1973, but you had a 2.5-mile-per-hour impact standard, I believe, in the rear. So you needed a full-width bumper, and this one, notice those little slots in the bottom, by the way, too. Those are for the jack, the bumper jacks. If you got a flat tire, you would be putting it in there, and then invariably you'd kind of damage the bumper to some degree. It was not a great setup. So if you ever get a flat tire with your old car, I would highly recommend don't use the bumper jack. Just wait for a tow truck or go leave the car and have your significant other pick you up and get a regular old floor jack and change the tire out. Yeah, but I do think that the rear is quite handsome. You notice that you have, similar to the 67 to 70 Eldorado that started this trend for the Cadillacs, you have this V'd backlight that has the hot wire bend in the middle. Notice you have the seam in the vinyl roof lining up with that bend in the backlight, lining up with the crease in the deck lid, and even the crease in the bumper. So that was something that, again, was very General Motors-y, and I think gave this back end some great character that it otherwise wouldn't have. And lastly, on the exterior, before we move on to the interior, these wheels, the Chevrolet Rally wheels, I wanted to point out one thing, because this is an ingenious cost savings. And I know some people are going to hate me for saying that, but this is just a regular old steel wheel with a sombrero-style center cap and then a trim ring around the outer edge. That's all that this is. So the Chevrolet designers found a way to take their regular old steel wheel and dress it up and make it look good. That was the same, by the way, as the Pontiac honeycomb wheels. That was not let's say, the honeycomb pattern was basically just a plastic cap over top of a steel wheel. It wasn't intended to be that. The designers wanted those wheels to be actual honeycomb designs inspired by Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion dome style houses where everything was held in tension. But, well, the engineers and the finance people got to them, and I think they got to them at Chevrolet too. But hey, you know what? It looks good, and it's pretty convincing if you don't know that that's how it's concocted. Now, as we rotate to the inside, you kind of got a curious mix of good and bad here on the interior. The seats are quite similar to the previous generation Monte Carlo, though it doesn't necessarily look at the bench seat in here is actually pretty comfortable. This one has the standard seat belts, the black seat belts. They were not color keyed standard. But the door panel has a decent size armrest section. It does have this soft touch material up top with the pull handle. The lower section, aside from that armrest piece, is just hard plastic, though. It's okay. Kind of a take it or leave it. The dash and the fit and finish on some of the plastics here isn't that great. You'll notice the wheel was color keyed for 1973, but some of the sections of the instrument panel are always black, no matter the interior color. And then you get this really, really fake wood grain that we're going to take a look at in a second. Some fake wood grain that some automakers did, like Ford, actually looked pretty good, but I don't think GM ever did fake wood grain very well. And here you can see what I mean by the instrument panel has these sections that are always black, no matter the interior color. Kind of a basic instrument panel. You have the fuel gauge on the left, the speedometer on the right. You got idiot lights. You can see the oil idiot light there at the top left. Lots of exposed screws here too, which is not adding to the luxury style nature. This was a personal luxury coupe, and the interior, like I said, some things, this interior theme, I don't think in particular I really care for. It is kind of canted around the driver a little bit. You can see the right side of the IP sweeps inward, but it's just kind of a take it or leave it. At least this car's got air conditioning. You got the crotch cooler vents down there below, just around the steering column. Now, as we move under hood, this car is equipped with a 350 cubic inch 2-barrel V8. You'll notice this huge fan shroud, and that's because the engine is set so far back in these Monte Carlos, the radiator so far forward. They're trying to make the hood longer on these A Special cars, and the result is what you see here, the engine set back very far from the radiator. But the standard engine made 145 horsepower. There was an optional 354 barrel that made 175 horsepower. And then there was the big block, 454 cubic inch, that made 245 net horsepower. So I have to say, while it doesn't sound like a lot, 145 horsepower in the standard engine, it really pushes the car along surprisingly well. I'm very pleasantly surprised by my 72 Monte Carlo. It just has a standard 352 barrel. And it's a lovely engine. It's so smooth, so silent, very, very torquey. Not bad on the horsepower. A little bit of a wheeze at the upper RPM range, but not bad, to be honest. So I think buyers are very satisfied with their Chevrolet 350s. And, of course, if you got the big block, you probably were even more satisfied, but you paid extra for it. But the engines in these were quite reliable and very good, outfitted with a turbohydromatic 350 or 400 transmission, some of the best transmissions that General Motors ever made. And so at least your Monte Carlo would drive very, very well. So what do you think of the 73 Monte Carlo, particularly vis-a-vis the 1970 to 72 model year and other Monte Carlos, even the one that came after it, the 1978? Put a comment in the comment section and let me know. Thanks again for watching.